Greetings, imagination connoisseurs. Once again, it is I, your Duke of Dope Discourse, Robert Meyer Burnett. I invite you to watch and listen to the Designing Hollywood podcast, brought to you by Martika Ibarra and the great, legendary Hollywood costume designer, Marilyn Vance. I am afforded the wonderful opportunity of co-hosting the show. If you are interested in the magic of Hollywood, the design of Hollywood, the clothes of Hollywood, watch the Designing Hollywood podcast, available wherever you get your podcasts from, or find the video version on the John Campea YouTube channel. That's right, the Designing Hollywood podcast. Why would you ever want to miss it? Especially if you love the movies.
Observations with Robert Meyer Burnett.
I've heard it said before, like, it was a very smart man named Robert Meyer Burnett who said the currency of our current age is authenticity. And it's so true.
Imagination Connoisseurs Unlimited, in association with Road to Perdition author Max Allan Collins, brings you the immersive audio drama True Noir, the Nathan Heller casebooks, starring Todd Stashwick. You loved him as Captain Liam Shaw in Star Trek Picard Season 3, as Nathan Heller, once a Chicago PD officer turned private eye to the stars. Nathan Heller gets embroiled in many historical cases. He's fictional. The stories are real. Look out for the 10-part audio drama coming soon to a crowdfunding campaign near you. Greetings, imagination connoisseurs. Once again, it is I, your Duke of Dope Discourse, your master of fun and wonder, your viceroy of verisimilitude, your sommelier of sci-fi and cinema, your evangelist of the imagination, and the perhaps never to be defined existential Mr. Rogers. That's right, me, Robert Meyer Burnett, and I am Robcasting at you, you imagination connoisseurs, you members of this, the Post-Geek Singularity community. This is Robservations episode number 953. So, Variety magazine came out. It has a cover story about Star Trek. It asks the question, is Star Trek still relevant? We're going to get into this, but I want to just focus on one thing first. And that is something Secret Hideout, impresario, and lord of all Star Trek since 2017, even though he usurped it from Brian Fuller. But you can read about that on your own. Here's a choice quote from the article. This is a quote from Mr. Alex Kurtzman himself. We listen to a lot of it, Kurtzman says. I think I've been able to separate the toxic fandom from the really true fans who love Star Trek and want you to hear what they have to say about what they would like to see. I would like to know how do you, Alex Kurtzman, separate the toxic fandom from the really true fans? How do you define really true fans, Alex Kurtzman? I wonder, is everyone that's critical of the swill that you've been turning out since 2017, that, by the way, hasn't nearly made as much money for the studio as you would have hoped, just like the 3 Star Trek movies that you were involved with back when you were working with Bad Robot? Oh, wait. I get ahead of myself. Why is it that the creators who are criticized for working in IPs that they didn't create, don't necessarily have a passion for, why are they the ones always calling their audience, who are the people that most eagerly await what they're making, only to be disappointed again and again and again? Why are we called toxic if we're critical? Why? Why is anybody who is, if you're a fan of something, if you call yourself a fan of something, why are there now labels? Why do creators throw the label toxic fans around at all? You know, One of the things I learned very early on, because I worked on a lot of projects, low-budget projects that I knew were never going to be considered in the same light as, say, Apocalypse Now or A Clockwork Orange or Sunset Boulevard or All About Eve or any of Double Indemnity, some of my Casablanca, some of my favorite movies, I knew that. I never called anybody toxic who didn't like the work that I had done. I knew that I gave it my all. I knew I did the best we could at what we had to work with. But I would have never have called a critic a toxic fan. You learn very early on when you're a real creative that's really good at what you do. You don't have to criticize your fans. You don't have to criticize anyone. You just put your work out there and let it speak for itself. Your work is the locomotive. If you want to go on a whistle-stop tour and hang out at the caboose and wave to your fans and do all that, you can. But the work is the locomotive that carries you down the tracks. It says everything that should be needed to be said about you. Let the work define who and what you are. And if your audience is not, say, your customers are not, say, loving it or liking it, maybe instead of calling them toxic, you should stop for a minute and think, I wonder why we've lost these people, especially people that have loved this particular IP for half a century. Star Trek is 58 years old. Star Trek, a lot of people worked on Star Trek throughout its entire history, and the people, I think, that are working on it now have the least amount of passion for it. Not all of them. I would say that Mr. Mike McMahon, who created Star Trek Lower Decks, is very passionate about Star Trek. I think he's outside of Star Trek. I don't think he's capable of making a show within Star Trek. It's too postmodern. I liked his tweets about the 8th season of Star Trek The Next Generation, but like so many people, it was all a goof. I didn't get any indication that he could make a serious, thoughtful Star Trek show. And I will say right off the bat, the thing about Star Trek is it always evolved. It always changed and grew until 2009. Then it did something that Star Trek hadn't been doing in its entire history, which was go back and reboot Star Trek. Take the very core tenets that were created by other people, Kirk, Spock, McCoy, the Enterprise, the Federation, Vulcans, Klingons, what have you, and decide to do it the way they wanted to do it, as opposed to pushing forward. The interesting thing about Star Trek as a franchise is that it has always moved forward. It was a failed not a failed TV show, but not a big hit of a TV show from 66 to 69. It existed as an animated show, which, by the way, was a show that was directed at children. However, it was incredibly smart. It always shot high. It never pandered to its audience. And a lot of people, myself included, consider the animated series as the other 2 years of the 5-year mission of the Enterprise we didn't see. And Alan Dean Foster novelized those animated episodes, and it got to the point where it started out as 3 episodes a book, but by the end he was expanding one 22-minute animated episode into an entire novel. Now, is tie-in fiction legitimate? I would say certainly, because someone like Alan Dean Foster made it so. His novelizations of the animated episodes worked in tandem with those animated episodes, and they certainly weren't pandering to a child's audience or a child's mentality. As a matter of fact, I fell in love with Star Trek when I was 5 years old. I've loved it my entire life, for over a half century now. No one ever was making Star Trek shows for kids, thank God. I didn't necessarily want to see myself reflected in Star Trek. The whole point was that I aspired to one day, well, if I couldn't grow up and actually be people on the Enterprise, to know people like that, to be a part of that kind of a future. And I would say one of the great things about Star Trek is it has some of the greatest tie-in fiction of all time. The really great Star Trek authors took what they saw and, like all great science fiction, used the concepts and expanded the concepts and made the universe much bigger than we could see on a television budget. I would dare say anybody who's interested in the Klingons, if you have not read John Ford's book, The Final Reflection, This is easily one of the finest science fiction novels ever written. And if you want to know about the Klingons, here's your book. I don't think anyone should work on a Star Trek show without having read this novel, to be honest. There's more in this book. There's more concepts and more characterization than anything we've seen in Star Trek since 2017, with the exception of Star Trek Picard Season 3, which is really Next Generation. Well, a third of a season of Next Generation. Remember, Star Trek used to have 26-episode seasons. I mean, Discovery gave us 13, then sometimes 15, but I don't know. Anyway, it's incredibly frustrating to watch a franchise that always moved forward do nothing but swim backwards since 2009. Let's go, I know it's a different universe, but let's go turn Star Trek into Star Wars and give us a Kirk, Spock, and a McCoy, while well cast, act like characters that were really unrecognizable, other than the fact that Carl Urban does a great DeForest Kelley impression. Discovery, prequel. Strange New Worlds, prequel. You know, these were not... Roddenberry, when he made Next Generation, he's like, you know what? Let's go 100 years, almost 100 years in the future. So we can still be part of the same universe, but let's examine how that universe might have grown and changed. Why? I mean, and here's another thing, and we'll delve into this article shortly, but there is a weird thought that you're going to somehow pander to an audience that was never a Star Trek audience before and find a new audience. Well, I think you can find a new Star Trek audience if you do something new with the Star Trek franchise, the way that Star Trek The Next Generation did. And it's amazing Star Trek The Next Generation survived beyond its first 2 seasons. And in season 3, it became the show we all now know and love and has gone into television history. But the Star Trek shows today, they have no identity of their own. Strange New Worlds, people are like, yeah, it's like the original series. No, it isn't. Because the writing in the original series was written by novelists, was written by some of the great fantasists of the day, people that really understood science fiction, science, and they were not people that grew up watching television because television didn't exist. You know, they led lives in a time where during the 1960s, when the original Star Trek was made, the fact that they made a show about the optimism of the future was pretty incredible, considering you were in the midst of the Vietnam War. You had the Civil Rights Movement. President Kennedy had been assassinated, and his idea, the Camelot White House, was a big inspiration of what they were trying to do. You had Martin Luther King assassinated, Robert Kennedy assassinated. We did have the space program. But the idea that they were able to make a show like Star Trek during one of the most tumultuous times in modern American history, not necessarily, well, World War I and World War II, of course, Korea as well, but socially the country was being torn apart. And yet they were still able to give us an incredible vision of the future that not everybody embraced. Star Trek was always a niche show, because erudite science fiction appeals to only a certain amount of people. But this idea to turn Star Trek into a franchise like Star Wars or the MCU is foolhardy, because then it ceases to be Star Trek. And the whole reason it endured for 58 years is because of the kind of stories that it told. And it's not doing that now. Yeah, a certain percentage of people are enjoying it, as there's a certain percentage of people that would enjoy everything. But the first thing I want to do is, I'd love to delve into, at first, to start with Paramount itself. This today from Variety. Todd Spangler wrote this article. Paramount Global's debt rating downgraded to junk by the S&P. Analyst says more buyers are likely to emerge from media companies' assets with a ratings cut. Paramount Global's debt rating was cut to junk status by credit rating agency S&P Global, which cited the media conglomerate's ongoing challenges with free cash flow generation relative to its debt. S&P on Wednesday said it expects Paramount Global's free operating cash flow to debt will remain well below 10% through 2025. And that adjusted leverage, debt to equity ratio, will stay above 3.5 times through then. The agency cited the ongoing deterioration of the linear television ecosystem and the elevated investments for its direct-to-consumer streaming model for the downgrade. Why hasn't their streaming model worked? They've gone all in on 2 animated Star Trek shows and 3 live-action series, with a Section 31 movie coming and a ridiculous Starfleet Academy show, an idea that they've been floating for 40 years that they never made work. But because they think they're going to make Star Trek appeal to kids, young adults, YA fiction, which, by the way, they've also done in novels, just saying, I don't suppose anyone even knows that who's working on Star Trek. I'm willing to bet you that any one of the YA Star Trek novels that were written will be 100 times better than whatever scripts they write for the Starfleet Academy series. I know, I'll watch it, but what can you say? All modern genre Star Trek writers today, as a matter of fact, that are writing anything, whether it's The Magicians, even though that was a pretty good show, and there's a lot of ties to Starfleet Academy, everybody wants to write fucking Buffy the Vampire Slayer and Angel. I don't mean, those are great shows, but everybody's looking to those shows, and that has become the template for any genre programming now, because all the writers, that's all they know. Give Michelle Paradise one science fiction novel to read. And I don't mean one that's written in the last 5 or 10 years. I mean, Werner Vinge died. Michelle, go read A Fire Upon the Deep. Mr. Vinge passed away. I'm sure you've never heard of him, but go read A Fire Upon the Deep. There's more concepts in that novel than is in 5 seasons of Discovery. And I'll tell you something, Michelle Paradise. You wrote the first episode of Star Trek Discovery Season 5. And I can't show the picture, but in that episode, there's an avalanche. And in order to prevent disaster, you, my dear madame, you wrote and shot and presided over as the showrunner a scene where our hero starship, the Discovery, along with a second starship, literally crash primary hull first into the surface of a planet, literally like R2 and 3PO going headfirst into the sands of Tatooine in Return of the Jedi, and using the deflector shields to stop an avalanche. If there's any one sequence in Discovery, and it took you 5 years to write this gem, that makes me look at you guys and go, what the fuck are you guys doing? It's that scene. Forever now, Star Trek is going to have a scene where a capital ship can crash into a planet. I know it's 32nd century technology, 31st century, whatever it is. This, to me, it's the antithesis of everything wrong. It's the antithesis of great Star Trek. Look, even if it was possible, don't do that, because you shatter any believability of. I watch this and it drives me insane. I'm looking at this going, why am I being treated like I'm an idiot? Why am I expected to watch something like this? If the people that are writing the show can't come up with something better than that, that's how you save somebody from, crashing a starship on the face first into a planet? I mean, come on. And then, of course, I figured maybe they'll come up with something original, maybe have an original MacGuffin. Nope. Let's look to the 6th season TNG episode, The Chase. Let's piggyback off that. You guys are so fucking creative. But anyway, hey, Paramount will need to execute its plan to substantially improve streaming losses over the next 2 years to mitigate further downside ratings pressure. Streaming losses, because nobody wants to watch shows that Paramount Plus is streaming except Yellowstone and Taylor Sheridan's work. Certainly not Star Trek. Shouldn't Star Trek be at the forefront of what people want to watch? Isn't that something at Paramount Global? Where's the great success in modern Star Trek? Why? Then people would ask me, why, Rob? Why do they keep making Star Trek shows? Because Star Trek is something, the more they add to the tapestry of Star Trek, the more they add to the value of the studio as a whole, because the people who are going to buy the studio, they don't know the difference between good Star Trek and bad Star Trek. They only know there's a lot of it, which means the value goes up. Because whether people watched it or not, if you ask people how much money did Star Trek 09, Star Trek Into Darkness, and Star Trek Beyond make? We're going to get to that in a minute. Midnight's Edge has done great video pieces about how much those movies actually made or didn't make. But Rob, Star Trek movies, they were all successful. They made more money than any Star Trek movie that ever came out. Not in relation to their budget, they didn't. I mean, that's what people don't understand. It's like Star Trek 09, $75 million or $175 million budget plus the extensive marketing. The movie didn't make even $500 million. And it means the studio only takes home half of that. So Star Trek 09 for Paramount did not even clear $250 million. And on a $175 million spend, plus marketing, plus studio overhead, not a lot of money right there. So that's what people don't understand. Star Trek Beyond, look at the box office numbers there compared to its budget. Modern Star Trek has not made money. It has not made the studio. They keep making it because of what's going on now. Let me just continue. So Paramount will need to execute its plan to substantially improve streaming losses over the next 2 years to mitigate further downside ratings pressure, S&P said in its ratings adjustment. Paramount Global's long-term debt was $14.6 billion as of the end of 2023. A rep for Paramount Global declined to comment. The S&P downgrade comes a week after word emerged of an $11 billion bid by private equity firm Apollo Global Management for Paramount Pictures, a price tag some $3 billion higher than the current total market cap of the parent company. S&P's credit rating cut on Paramount Global increases the chance that more buyers for its assets will come forward. Wells Fargo analyst Stephen Cahall wrote in a research note, that's because with the junk status assigned to Paramount's debt, an acquiring party would not need to repay or reissue debt, he wrote. We think any party interested in all or pieces of Paramount Global, including studios, IP, CBS, and real estate, are more likely to emerge now that the debt cash-on-cash return is void, according to Cahall. Sources familiar with the thinking of Sherry Redstone, non-executive chair of Paramount Global and its controlling shareholder, say her preference is to not sell the company off in pieces. Rather, Redstone is understood to favor a deal with David Ellison's Skydance Media, under which Skydance would acquire Redstone's National Amusements Incorporated holding company to pave the way for Skydance and Paramount Global to merge. As part of its rating update, S&P issued a stable outlook for Paramount Global, which reflects our expectation that leverage will decline to around 4.0 in 2024, with FOCF debt improving to about 5% as losses in the streaming segment materially decline. That is largely based on our assumption that streaming losses will improve by more than $700 million due to a strong average revenue per user growth from price increases enacted in mid-2023 and ongoing, albeit more modest subscriber growth. So, they're expecting that more people will subscribe to Paramount. Well, if your Star Trek isn't great, what are they subscribing to watch? Star Trek should be a Tiffany show. It should be the gold standard of television. Star Trek should be giving us House of the Dragon, that level of great television. Instead, we're getting hipster light Strange New Worlds, where they've turned the Gorn into monsters and everybody gets to hang out and talk about their relationships and, oh, here's a musical episode. It's the furthest thing away from original Star Trek. People are like, well, Rob, it's more like the episodic. Look, it's not the format that makes Star Trek great. It's the writing. It's the storytelling. They've got great actors. They've got all kinds of great set design. They've got well, I can't stand the design of the visual effects, but that's something else. But they've got good visual effects people. What they don't have is smart stories. They have nothing to say. They're just regurgitating the same shit you could watch in any TV show that has human relationship drama happening. Spock and his girlfriend's more important to the show than, say, coming up with some interesting show like Devil in the Dark, where Spock mind melds with a Horta and finds out that a murderous creature is not really a murderous creature at all, but a mother protecting her young. Give me that kind of Star Trek. S&P Global on February 23rd placed Paramount Global on credit watch negative. The firm explained that it took the action after it introduced cash flow metrics along with existing leverage metrics into its rating methodology. Previously, the firm had a BBB minus rating on the company, its lowest investment grade rating. With the change Wednesday, S&P now has an issuer credit rating on Paramount Global and its senior unsecured debt of BB+, which is the highest speculative grade by market participants. At the same time, S&P lowered its issue-level rating on Paramount Global's junior subordinated debt to B and B- from BB, and its short-term rating to B from A3. So, not great for old Paramount. Not doing well. If Star Trek was a strong, healthy brand that appealed to the kind of audiences that, say, Taylor Sheridan's shows appealed to, it might do more. But the problem is, Star Trek, as it exists now, has nothing to say to our world today. The reason that Star Trek appealed to college students and forward-thinking people back in the 60s was because it was groundbreaking. It was groundbreaking in that it offered an optimistic view of the future. Now, as I pointed out in a show a couple days ago, part of the problem with Star Trek is it's now deeply cynical. It doesn't have a forward-thinking, optimistic view of the future. The institutions suck. The villains are now, they've literally taken villains and turned them into giant monsters that will eat you. I can't think of a more reductive way of telling a Star Trek story than suddenly to create a villain, turn the Gorn into aliens with spaceships. I mean like the xenomorphs with spaceships. How about everybody, I beg you, one read of this book. Just pick up this book. It's not a big book. You can't have this because these are rare hardcovers. Just this. If you read one Star Trek novel, just read The Final Reflection. It will show you what a great Star Trek story is, and it'll show you the possibilities of what kind of Star Trek stories you can tell. Let's get back to what Alex Kurtzman said. We listen to a lot of criticism, Kurtzman said. I think I've been able to separate the toxic fandom from really true fans who love Star Trek and want you to hear what they have to say about what they would like to see. I want to see really great writers writing really great stories. I think Star Trek, because it's been around so long, we should have the best writers writing Star Trek. The best. People that have, actually read science fiction, understand what a science fiction show is. I'm not convinced the people making Star Trek actually do. Michelle Paradise certainly doesn't, judging from her episode of Star Trek that she wrote for the fifth season opener of Discovery. I mean, I wish I could do a watch along with all of you right now. We can decide for ourselves together. But there was a big article that came out today, and I'm looking forward to jumping into it, and we're going to read it together. And it was, by the way, I want to point out, it was written by Adam Very, who's a great writer. He's a great writer for Variety, and I give him mad props. But I just want to start out and say this is, because of Paramount's situation in terms of money, this is Joseph Goebbels, man. This is a propaganda puff piece about the state of the franchise. And I understand why. I get it. It's an industry trade paper. They're trying to curry favor with people so people know what's going on. I get it. But let's jump into this article and see what it has to say. I can't believe I get to play the captain of the Enterprise. Anson Mount is sitting across from me on one of the Toronto sound stages for the Paramount Plus series Star Trek Strange New Worlds, which is set in the years when his character, Captain Christopher Pike, led the legendary Federation starship with a young Spock and Uhura. We're speaking on the sleek Enterprise bridge, and Mount is recounting the out-of-body experience he had the first time he sat in the iconic captain's chair. I had this immediate flashback to playing Star Trek as a kid, he says. I don't think a day goes by where I don't at some point stop and think to myself, I'm on fucking Star Trek. Now, here's the thing. Nothing but love for Anson Mount. He was in the TV series I worked on for Netflix, Dota Dragon's Blood. He did a voice. He was great. Anson Mount is great as Pike. But my question is, why are we watching a TV series about Captain Pike? A character that was in the very first pilot made for Star Trek back in 1965 that never passed muster with the network and was canceled and retooled. Obviously, we saw Pike repurposed in the two-part episode The Menagerie from the first season of the original series, but they fixated on this character, and they've brought him back, and he's great. Anson Mount is great as Pike, no doubt about it, but they haven't given him one great script to play, one great story to be in. But anyway, that's just me. And it's I don't think a day goes by where I don't at some point stop and think to myself, I'm on fucking Star Trek. We've heard that from how many people that have been on shows like this? A lot. Strange New Worlds is the 12th Star Trek TV show since the original series debuted on NBC in 1966. Introducing Gene Roddenberry's vision of a hopeful future for humanity. In the 58 years since, the Star Trek galaxy has logged 900 television episodes and 13 feature films, amounting to 668 hours, nearly 28 days of content to date. Even compared with Star Wars and the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Star Trek stands as the only storytelling venture to deliver a single narrative experience for this long across TV and films. In other words, Star Trek is not just a franchise. As Alex Kurtzman, who oversees all of Star Trek TV production, puts it, Star Trek is an institution. An institution I want to point out that you don't really believe in. Without a steady infusion of new blood, though, institutions have a way of fading into oblivion. See soap operas, MySpace, Blockbuster Video. I don't know, General Hospital fans might beg to differ. I know because my mom is one of them. To keep Star Trek thriving has meant charting a precarious course to satisfy the fans who have fueled it for decades, while also discovering innovative ways to get new audiences on board. You don't need innovative ways to get new audiences on board. All you need are great stories and great characters, well told. That's it. That's all you need. Not Frankenstein versions of what we've seen in the past. Doing Star Trek means you have to deliver something that's entirely familiar and entirely fresh at the same time. Does it? Is that what it means, Alex Kurtzman says? This coming from the man who directed Tom Cruise in The Mummy and destroyed the entire Dark Universe before it even got started. Fulfilling that mandate has never been more vital to Paramount Global, which needs the franchise to flourish while the company competes in a troubled streaming economy and burnishes its value for potential buyers. That's why this article exists. They're burnishing, it says right here, Adam Verey's very clever. He's a great writer. He flat out came out and said it. Fulfilling that mandate has never been more vital to Paramount Global, which needs the franchise to flourish while the company competes in a troubled streaming economy and burnishes its value for potential buyers. That's why they're still making Star Trek. Because potential buyers just think of Star Trek as a brand name, and the more they've created of all this stuff, whether it's doing well or not, part of the reason that Paramount is in the position it's in is because Star Trek has not performed the way they've wanted it to perform since 2009. But because it's their oldest long-running franchise, and it still happens today, anybody's going to look at Star Trek and just be like, well, look at how much Star Trek there is. There's all those Star Trek fans out there. And so the more Star Trek they have, the more they can say the value of Star Trek grows. But that's not true. It's not true because good Star Trek would be of value, but buyers aren't going to know the difference. Hell, the people making Star Trek don't know the difference. So anyway, we take it very seriously, says David Staff, president of CBS Studios. Star Trek is one of the most valued, treasured, and to-be-nurtured franchises in all of media. Really? Really? Do you know who nurtured Star Trek quite well? Terry Matalas. Terry Matalas, when he took over as showrunner for Picard Season 3, and won Saturn Awards. Star Trek Picard Season 3 won Saturn Awards. It was in the top 10 shows viewed for a while there. And do you know who's not mentioned in this particular article? Terry Matalas. Do you know what else is not mentioned in this article? Saturn Awards. Wonder why that is. Because Alex Kurtzman wasn't responsible for either one. He was off making his, and to be fair, not bad, his sequel to The Man Who Fell to Earth, because Alex Kurtzman can't be bothered to make anything original. So why not take Walter Tevis's book and Nicholas Roeg's film and go make a sequel series? And Akiva Goldsman, genius that he is, I know he'll put his Academy Award on his desk and say how great it is, but he's never done anything really of value unless it was an adaptation of something. And even then, he's very hit and miss. The man responsible for Lost in Space and I, Robot. Anyway, the franchise has certainly weathered its share of fallow periods, most recently after Nemesis bombed in theaters in 2002 and UPN canceled Enterprise in 2005. Let me tell you, if any modern Star Trek did the numbers that Enterprise did at the time, they'd be very happy indeed. It took 12 years for Star Trek to return to television with the premiere of Discovery in 2017. Since then, however, there has been more Star Trek on TV than ever. Well, not by episode numbers, but okay. The adventure series Strange New Worlds, the animated comedy Lower Decks, and the kids series Prodigy. Think about that. The adventure series Strange New Worlds, which recreates the original series vibe. The animated comedy Lower Decks, because Star Trek fans are always clamoring for comedies. And the kids series Prodigy, which, by the way, an argument can be made that of all modern Star Trek Prodigy is probably the best show, which I hate to say that, but it's true. And the kids' series Prodigy are all in various stages of production, and the serialized thriller Picard concluded last year when it ranked, along with Strange New Worlds, amongst Nielsen's 10 most watched streaming original series for multiple weeks. Again, this would be a nice place to mention Terry Matalas or the Saturn Awards that it won. Nearly 1 in 5 Paramount Plus subscribers in the U.S. is watching at least one Star Trek series, but not necessarily in Paramount Plus, because they used to advertise Paramount Plus as the home of Star Trek. What did they have to do with Star Trek? They had to send it out to other places, make some more money, get some of those licensing dollars. But because they weren't watching it all on Paramount Plus, nearly 1 in 5 Paramount Plus subscribers in the U.S. is watching at least one Star Trek series, according to the company, and more than 50% of fans watching one of the new Trek shows also watch at least 2 others. The new shows air in 200 international markets and are dubbed into 35 languages. As Discovery launches its 5th and final season, thank fucking God, in April, Star Trek is in many ways stronger than it's ever been. Just because you have more of something doesn't mean it's necessarily a good thing. I understand the more Star Trek they make. I mean, hey, we're going to get a Section 31 show after they completely showed they didn't understand what Section 31 even was. It's the space CIA. Ah, I see. And of course, we're getting Starfleet Academy because, everybody wants to watch a Star Trek show about people that aren't yet on a Star Trek. How is it different from, you know what it is? It's The Magicians, it's Harry Potter, it's Gen V, it's not going to be the fucking Paper Chase or Dead Poets Society, I guarantee it. Or like I said before, Donna Tartt's The Secret History. I'd watch that Starfleet Academy show. If you gave me Donna Tartt's The Secret History at Starfleet Academy, bam, I'd watch the hell out of that shit. Star Trek's fans have kept it alive more times than it seems possible, says Eugene Roddenberry Jr., who executive produces the TV series through Roddenberry Entertainment. While many shows rightfully thank their fans for supporting them, we literally wouldn't be here without them. Oh, wait a minute. We wouldn't be here without them. And by the way, Rod, I love you. You know I do. But we wouldn't be here without them. According to Alex Kurtzman, I think I've been able to separate the toxic fandom from the really true fans who love Star Trek and want you to hear what they have to say about what they would like to see. I'll say it again. Great stories, great characters, and it's all well told. And, the people that wrote the original series wrote novels. They wrote short stories. They wrote plays. They were real writers that didn't just write fucking TV. And TV that's based on other TV shows that they're trying to recreate, as opposed to writing something, say, new. But the depth of fan devotion to Star Trek also belies a curious paradox about its enduring success. It's not the largest fan base, says Akiva Goldsman, Strange New Worlds executive producer and co-showrunner. It's not Star Wars. It's certainly not Marvel. Okay, Akiva, now that we know you've said that, then why are you trying to appeal to Marvel fans and Star Wars fans? Why are you trying to fundamentally change Star Trek when you know it's not the largest fan base? You could grow the fan base, not by trying to change it into something else, but by taking Star Trek's core tenets and do what they did in the 90s. Star Trek became a show that had incredible mass appeal because they told stories that were resonant, that everybody could... The science fiction of it all was immaterial. They told great human stories wrapped in a great action-adventure science fiction bow. But Star Trek... there's an argument to be made that Star Trek was at its most successful in 1994, when Star Trek The Next Generation went off the air, Deep Space Nine was in its second season, and the Generations movie came out, and Star Trek was on the cover of Time magazine. And Star Trek The Next Generation was the most watched first-run, hour-long syndicated show, and that was a new thing on TV. And it was a hit around the world. Quinto and Zoe Saldana playing Kirk, Spock, and Uhura. The movie grossed more than any previous Star Trek film by a comfortable margin. But neither that film nor its two sequels broke $500 million in global grosses, a hurdle every other top-tier franchise can clear without breaking a sweat. Because Star Trek is not that kind of a franchise. And if people were smart, and they actually... First of all, who thought that Star Trek was going to be a franchise that could gross what other franchises grossed? Who ever thought that? They were idiots. That's why they spent $175 fucking million on a Star Trek movie. Now, if they had made the smart play, they would have spent, because it was all essentially actors they could get for not as much money. And if you really knew how to make a movie, you would have made that movie for $85 million. Or, if you wanted to go look in Paramount's past, make it like Hunt for Red October. You could have made Hunt for Red October into a great Star Trek movie if you wanted to. There are aliens. They didn't have to be Klingons, but they're aliens that are defecting with a weapon of war. It could have been, you could take Hunt for Red October and completely transpose it and turn it into a Star Trek movie. Hunt for Red October in 1990 came out. In 1989, when it was shot, cost $30 million. The reason that I say this about it being a Star Trek movie is because it's a great Star Trek story with great Star Trek characters. They could have done that. They could have had a whole new cast of characters. But no, they went and spent a ridiculous amount of money on a franchise property that had never, ever justified that kind of expense ever before. And they kept... Star Trek is something theatrically, it's like trying to make fetch happen. If you go back, and again, Midnight's Edge has done stories on this. If you've watched or you've been keeping up, do you know how many Star Trek 4 movies they've announced with different casts of characters? And I mean, the characters they want to keep the same, but different writer-directors. How many people they've gone through. I would love to know, by signing some of these people and having scripts written and rewritten and rewritten and rewritten, it's how much money is already against. If you spent money developing a project, the reason Star Trek the Motion Picture cost $44 million is they rolled in all the development costs for both Star Trek Planet of the Titans and the Star Trek Phase 2 TV series that they'd built sets for but didn't make. Star Trek the Motion Picture didn't cost $44 million. It cost $44 million when you included all the development fees to make movies that didn't get made. That's what Star Trek 4 is at right now. So They keep announcing, and they've announced even more. It is the most, I mean, if you want to look at ineptness in Hollywood, go look at how many people that they've announced are, I mean, seriously, I don't even know the number, but it would be really interesting to know. Go look into how many times they've announced Star Trek 4. One time, they announced it without even checking with the cast. It's unbelievable. I mean, unbelievable. Bad Robot, who controls that film franchise, you know, what's J.J. Abrams directed since Rise of Skywalker? Go ahead, I'll wait. There's also the fact that Star Trek fans are aging. I ask the Next Generation star Jonathan Frakes, who's acted in or directed more versions of Star Trek than any other person alive, how often he meets fans for whom the new Star Trek shows are their first. And this is Jonathan Frakes, one of the nicest men in the world. Of the fans who come and talk to me, I would say very, very few, he says. Star Trek fans, as we know, are very, very loyal and not very young. Listen to that. Ask yourself, why? Why? And I don't think the answer is, well, we're going to make a Starfleet Academy show to appeal to our young fans. Or we're going to create new young fans with the Starfleet Academy show. I would say that maybe that would be possible, but not with the current stewards of the franchise, who are going to give you more pablum that you've seen again and again and again. But let's go through this article more. As Staff puts it, the head of CBS, there's a tried, this is so funny. This is so funny. As Staff puts it, there's a tried and true Trek fan that is probably going to come to every Star Trek no matter what it is, and we want to expand the universe. Man, these people. They want to expand the universe. You know, the funny thing about it was, I was 5 years old when I watched Star Trek, and it captured my imagination and everybody that kept it alive. But Star Trek has never been a populist franchise. Other than when Next Generation was on the air, and it was probably at its best, Star Trek was garnering the most viewership it ever had in its history. But this idea that they think they can take Star Trek and turn it into something that is going to appeal to a wider audience to create new fans, oh, I think that's possible. But you've got to do it by creating great characters and great stories, not taking something and transposing it into the Star Trek franchise. They're just going to take all they're doing now is mixing and matching other things and throwing them into a blender. They're not creating something new. They're not taking the basic tenets of Star Trek and show us a positive future where you have incredibly talented people who are able to work together, that they don't have their differences. There's the interpersonal relationships. They're all great at their jobs. It's what they find out there that causes the conflicts, and it's how they deal with that as a cohesive whole that makes the show. That is the basis of Star Trek. The best of the best that humanity and the Federation races have to offer, whether they're Andorians, whether they're Tellarites, whether they're Vulcans, take your pick. You know, you have a crew of aliens from across the universe who have all banded together in the United Federation of Planets, and they're going out on the edge, and they're cooperating because they've learned to cooperate, and they are encountering things that are beyond them, but through cooperation, they're able to surmount whatever problems they discover. It's not hard to do. And if you look at reboots that have been successful, things that have, I would say, I mean, it's a much darker show because it's about the destruction of humanity, but it should be the difference between Battlestar Galactica and what you get with, am I not broadcasting anymore? I am seeing, I don't even know how much I'm seeing a big red light. I don't know. Maybe that will help. But let's go back to this article. Because, man. Anyway. There's a tried and true Trek fan that is probably going to come to every Star Trek no matter what it is, and we want to expand the universe. Here's something that people need to understand. That's probably true for the most part, but you know what? fans are also being lost because the franchises can't rely. Fans are also discerning. When they're being shoveled shit to eat, they're not going to continue eating it. They're just not going to. While Paramount Pictures redoubles its efforts to get a Star Trek feature into theaters, Kurtzman and his production company Secret Hideout are pushing the boundaries of what Star Trek can look like on the small screen. Michelle Yeoh just wrapped filming the first Star Trek TV movie, Section 31, a spy thriller that the Oscar winner characterizes as Mission Impossible in space. And this summer, the first Star Trek YA series, Starfleet Academy, will start production on the largest single set ever created for Star Trek on TV. Really? The largest single set? Is that a selling point for me? I don't know. I mean, Star Trek The Next Generation already did a couple of great episodes dealing with Starfleet Academy, one being the first duty in the 5th season. Is it going to be as good as that? I wonder. And by the way, a Mission Impossible series in space sounds pretty damn good. So why not make that? Why do you turn Section 31, which was introduced in Deep Space Nine with one guy, the great Bill Sadler, playing Sloan, and he was one guy. But now, Section 31, everybody knows who they are. It's not the fucking CIA. Every single person I spoke to for this story talked about Star Trek with a joyful earnestness as rare in the industry as, nerd alert, a Klingon pacifist. When I'm meeting fans, sometimes they're coming to be confirmed like I'm kind of a priest, Ethan Peck says during a break in filming on the Strange New World set. He's in full Spock regalia, pointy ears, severe eyebrows, bowl haircut, and when asked about his earliest memories of Star Trek, he stares off into space in what looks like Vulcan contemplation. I remember being on the playground in 2nd or 3rd grade and doing the Vulcan salute, not really knowing where it came from, he says. When I thought of Star Trek, I thought of Spock, and now I'm him. It's crazy. You're not him. You're somebody playing him. You're playing a character that Leonard Nimoy embodied for over 30 years. To love Star Trek is to love abstruse science and cowboy diplomacy, complex moral dilemmas, and questions about the meanings of existence. It is. That's exactly right, Mr. Very. So why aren't we getting that from Star Trek anymore? It's ultimately a show with the most amazing vision of optimism, I think, ever put on screen in science fiction, says Kurtzman. Really? Then why did you write Star Trek Into Darkness, which was a movie that's literally about how horrible Starfleet is? Why didn't you write a movie like Star Trek IV, The Voyage Home, that had a cosmic problem that the only way it could be solved was with our crew of smart people that figured out a way to go back in time and rescue whales, which was an ecologically sound thing to do, and bring them into the future? But no, you literally wrote a movie where a Starfleet admiral is the bad guy. A movie which, by the way, where his super secret starship is on his desk. And no one ever asks, hey man, why do you have that super secret starship on your desk there? I've never seen that before. Anyway, I digress. It's ultimately a show with the most amazing vision of optimism, I think, ever put on screen in science fiction, says Kurtzman, who is 50. All you need is 2 minutes on the news to feel hopeless now. Star Trek is honestly the best balm you could ever hope for. Really? You mean with the Gorn-eating people? Or a musical episode? Or you ripping off Ursula K. Le Guin? Her short story, Those Who Walk Away from Umlaus? Or, having Una get put up on charges because of something she concealed from Starfleet? What episodes of Star Trek are actually optimistic that you've written? Is Star Trek Discovery optimistic? A dystopian show that has really done nothing optimistic ever in its entire existence. And in your first episode of season 5, you literally crash your hero starship on a planet face fucking first. I'm getting a tour of the USS Enterprise from Scotty, or rather Strange New World's production designer Jonathan Lee, who is gushing in his native Scottish burr as we step into the starship's transporter room. I got such a buzzer from doing this, I can't tell you, he says. I actually designed 4 versions of it. Lee is especially proud of the walkway he created to run behind the transporter pads, an innovation that allows the production to shoot the characters from a brand new set of angles as they beam up from a far-flung planet. It's one of the countless ways that this show has been engineered to be as cinematic as possible, part of Kurtzman's overall vision to make Star Trek on TV feel like a movie every week. Is anyone going to talk about the writing, the scripts, the stories they're telling? You're telling me that you've built a new place where you can stick cameras to get new interesting angles, to make it more cinematic? Star Trek doesn't need to be cinematic. I mean, it's great that it is, but it's like, I'd rather have stories that are written that feel like they're epic and movie quality. I don't care about the sets. I don't care about the special effects. I care about the characters and story. Watch the 6th season episode, Chain of Command Part 2. Remember, there are 4 lights, David Warner and Jean-Luc Picard. Gulma Dredd and Jean-Luc Picard sitting across from one another. High drama. Harris Yulin and Nana Visitor in Duet, the penultimate episode of Season 1 of Deep Space Nine. Almost a 2-character study. Watch those. You've never seen them, though. Maybe you watched Chain of Command, but I'll bet you haven't seen Duet. What's Duet? It wasn't on someone's list, BuzzFeed's list of 10 best Star Trek episodes. My God. If there's ever been a show ever made in the history of TV that doesn't tell you that its creators haven't actually watched the shows that came before it, it's Star Trek Discovery and Star Trek Strange New Worlds. Swear to God. Kurtzman's tenure with Star Trek began with co-writing the screenplay for Abrams' 2009 movie, which was suffused with a fast-paced visual style that was new to the franchise. Yeah, there's a reason for that. When CBS Studios approached Kurtzman in the mid-2010s about bringing Star Trek back to TV, he knew instinctively that it needed to be just as exciting as that film. Who gets co-creation credit for Star Trek Discovery? Brian Fuller does. His name is on the front of every single episode. Did they come to you, Alex Kurtzman, or did they go to Brian Fuller? Are we going to rewrite history? Oh, I don't know. I'm just a. It's just that was a just a thought. The scope was so much different than anything we'd ever done on Next Generation, says Frakes, who's helmed 2 feature films with the Next Generation cast and directed episodes of almost every live-action Star Trek TV series, including Discovery and Strange New Worlds. Every department has the resources to create. Yeah, but what have they created? Every department has the resources to create. What about the writing staff, man? What about the writing staff? What about anybody who's ever read a science fiction novel? A new science lab set for Season 3, for example, boasts a transparent floor atop a 4-foot pool of water that swirls underneath the central workbench, and the surrounding walls sport a half-dozen view screens with live schematics custom designed by a 6-person team. I like being able to paint on a really big canvas, Kurtzman says. The biggest challenge is always making sure that no matter how big something gets, you're never losing focus on that little emotional story. Okay. Let me read this again to you. A new science lab set for Season 3, for example, boasts a transparent floor atop a 4-foot pool of water that swirls underneath the central workbench, and the surrounding walls sport a half-dozen view screens with live schematics, custom designed by a 6-person team. Water? Look, man, if they put cetacean ops in here, and where does that come from? Again, it comes from the Star Trek blueprints that Rick Sternbach and Mike Kakuda worked on. That was a spin-off. It was a product that was made during the time of Star Trek The Next Generation. The idea was that cetacean ops, yes, there are whales on the Enterprise D, and, you know, I would expect nothing less than people on Star Trek Strange New Worlds to go, hey, man, let's stick whales on the show. That'll be cool. I'm not saying that's what they've done because they're not saying what it is, but cetacean ops, hey, it's been a part of Star Trek since the 80s. We just haven't seen it before. To strike that balance, Strange New Worlds showrunners Goldsman and Henry Alonzo Myers have rooted the series in a classic episodic structure while constantly experimenting with the fluidity of what Star Trek can be. In its first 2 seasons, Strange New Worlds hopped from monster horror to body swap comedy to costume fantasies to courtroom drama to a full-blown musical featuring a Klingon boy band. You say that as if it's a good thing. Aside from the musical, it's exactly what Star Trek did in the first season of the goddamn show from 1966 to 1967. For season 3, debuting in 2025, Frakes directed an episode framed as a Hollywood murder mystery that he calls the best episode of television I've ever done. A Hollywood murder mystery. Okay. That's nothing like that's ever been done on Star Trek before. At this point, is there a genre that Strange New Worlds can't do? Well, as long as we're in storytelling that is cogent and sure-handed, I'm not sure there is, Goldsman says. I would say there is a genre of storytelling that Strange New Worlds can't do. Fucking Star Trek! Fucking Star Trek! Strange New Worlds is doing everything but tell Star Trek stories. Jesus fucking Christ. We're getting a Hollywood murder mystery on Star Trek. Really? Because that's why I watch the show. I mean, are you kidding me? Listen to this. Listen to this. This approach is also meant to appeal to people who might want to watch Star Trek, but regard those 668 hours of backstory as an insurmountable burden. You shouldn't have to watch a previously on to follow our show. Really? So that's why you added the Gorn? That's why you brought the Guardian of Forever onto Star Trek? I mean, listen, these people don't even, what they say is irrational. It's like, are you kidding me? It would be great if you told brand new stories that we hadn't seen before. Don't bring back people that we've seen from the past. Don't rely on all those things. Write new, bold, original stories. That's what people want from Star Trek. They don't want you to... and by the way, have we been getting them? I mean, do we really think that Nurse Chapel and Spock's relationship, well, why it's become a highlight of the show for many, is that what people watch Star Trek for? I don't think so. You've turned Spock into the horn dog that people believe Kirk was. Unbelievable. To achieve so many hairpin shifts in tone and setting while maintaining Kurtzman's cinematic mandate, that's his mandate? To be cinematic, not to tell a great story? Strange New Worlds has embraced one of the newest innovation in visual effects, virtual production. First popularized in the Star Trek Wars series The Mandalorian, the technology called the AR wall involves a towering circular partition of LED screens projecting a highly detailed computer-generated backdrop. Rather than act against a green screen, the actors can see whatever fantastical surroundings their characters are inhabiting, lending a richer level of verisimilitude to the show. In Hollywood, that was a painted backdrop. They used that for almost 100 years in Hollywood. Now it's just a more sophisticated painted backdrop. It's just using an LED screen instead. I just want to point that out. But there is a catch. While technology is calibrated to maintain a proper sense of three-dimensional perspective through the camera lens, it can be a bit dizzying for anyone standing on the set. The images of the walls start to move in a way that makes no sense, says Anson Mount. You end up having to focus on something that's right in front of you so you don't fall down. And yet, even as he's talking about it, Mount can't help but break into a boyish grin. Sometimes we call it the holodeck, he says. In fact, the pathway to the AR wall on the set is dotted with posters of the virtual reality room from the Next Generation and the words, "Enter holodeck" in a classic Trek font. I want to take one of those home with me, Peck says. We'll have the art department make you one. Does the AR wall also affect him? I don't really get disoriented by it, as Spock would not get ill, so I'm method acting. I'm on the set of the Star Trek TV movie Section 31, seated in an opulent nightclub with a view of a brilliant swirling nebula, watching Michelle Yeoh rehearse with director Olatunde Osunsanami and her castmates. Originally, the project was announced as a TV series centered on Filippo Giordano, the semi-reformed tyrant. Originated on Discovery. First of all, the main character of Section 31 is the Empress of the Mirror Universe. She's just about as evil and ruthless as they come. That's what Section 31 is based around. Just pointing that out. We'd never let go of her, she says of her character. I was just blown away by all the different things I could do with her. Honestly, it was like, let's just get it done because I believe in this. A few minutes later, dozens of extras and all manner of outlandish evening wear file into the club, several of them made up as classic Star Trek aliens that fans might be surprised to see in this kind of swanky establishment. Let me tell you something. Star Trek fans are not surprised to see anything in modern Star Trek. They expect to see everything in modern Star Trek because they don't expect to get anything new because no one has the creativity enough to give us something new. They rely on old shit all the fucking time. Just want to say it. But I'm far more distracted by a different discovery. Georgiou is standing with a young Rachel Garrett, a character first introduced on Next Generation as the older, fearless captain of the USS Enterprise C. Because of course. Let's go to all the greatest episodes of Star Trek and just take things and use them. You know, if it's not Best of Both Worlds, it's Yesterday's Enterprise. And if it's not Yesterday's Enterprise, I'm waiting. I bet they're going to go visit the planet that the Inner Light aliens used to live on. Or something. If that means nothing to you, don't worry. The enormity of the revelation that Garrett is being brought back is meant only for fans. If you don't know who the character is, you're really not missing anything. Well, if you're not missing anything, why bring her back? Why not create a new character? Why not? It was always my goal to deliver an entertaining experience. That is true. This is just... They clearly don't want me to do this show. It has always been my goal to deliver an entertaining experience that is true to the universe but appeals to newcomers, says screenwriter Craig Sweeney. I wanted a low barrier of entry so that anybody could enjoy it. Low barrier of entry is right. I believe that entirely. Nonetheless, including Garrett on the show is exactly the kind of gasp-worthy detail meant to flood Star Trek fans with a geeky good feeling. Just because you mention some young character turns out to be a character from a Star Trek episode we already know and love, it's not a geeky good feeling. It's pandering, and it's really cheap, actually. Give us a new character that we've never met before, a new character that's unique to you, that you created, and give us something that is awesome. I mean... There's nothing that modern Star Trek does better than stealing from other people that created something that they didn't create. It's unbelievable. The mandate for Next Generation was, aside from DeForest Kelley passing the torch in Encounter at Farpoint, which was fun, they barely mentioned the original series, and we only saw a character from the original series in the third season because and by the way, each season of Star Trek, the first season was 26 episodes, the second season was 22 episodes, and the third season was another 26 episodes. That's a lot more episodes than any of these modern Star Trek shows are doing. Just saying. You cannot create new fans to the exclusion of old fans, Kurtzman says. You must serve your primary fan base first, and you must keep them happy. That is one of the most important steps to building new fans. No. The only thing fans of Star Trek want, old fans, are great stories well told. Throwing in a Rachel Garrett is not what fans want. They want great characters. That's it. It's so weird. On its face, the maxim would make Section 31 a genuine risk. The titular Black Ops organization has been controversial with Star Trek fans since it was introduced in the 1990s. The concept is almost antagonistic to some of the values of Star Trek, Sweeney says. Almost it is. But he saw Section 31 as an opportunity to broaden what a Star Trek project could be while embracing the radical inclusivity at the heart of the franchise's appeal. No, you saw it as another way, a Section 31 show. Instead of just looking at Star Trek shows, you can literally do Mission Impossible, or you can do whatever the hell else, spy thriller, Jean Le Carré, or whatever. whatever, another genre that you're not creative enough to work in yourself. So you've got something I can steal from there, and I can steal from there, I can steal from there, I can steal from there. Just saying. Famously, there's a spot for everybody in Roddenberry's utopia, so I was like, well, who wouldn't be the people who don't quite fit in, he says. I didn't want to make the Jean Le Carré version where you're in the headquarters and it's backbiting in shades of gray. I wanted to do the people who are at the edges out in the field. These are not people. So you wanted to do James Bond. These are not people who necessarily work together the way you would see on a Star Trek bridge. For the director who grew up watching The Next Generation with his father, it boils down to a simple question. Is it putting good into the world, he asks? Are these characters ultimately putting good into the world? Not if the stories are bad. Not if you're denigrating a franchise. Not if Paramount has been downgraded by the S&P. Are you putting out good into the world? It's not good enough. Are these characters ultimately putting good into the world? And taking a step back, are we putting good into the world? Are we inspiring humans watching this to be good? That, for me, is what I've always admired about Star Trek. Should Section 31 prove successful, Yo says she's game for a sequel, and Kurtzman is already eyeing more opportunities for TV movies, including a possible follow-up to Picard. Again, no mention of Terry Metalis, no mention of Saturn Awards, no mention of Legacy, none of that. The franchise's gung-ho sojourn into streaming movies, however, stands in awkward contrast to the persistent difficulty Paramount Pictures and Abrams' production company Bad Robot have had making a feature film following 2006's Star Trek Beyond, the longest theaters have gone without a Star Trek movie since Paramount started making them. For a movie reuniting Pine's Captain Kirk with his late father, played in 2009 by Star Trek by Chris Hemsworth, it fell apart in 2018. And around the same time, Quentin Tarantino publicly flirted with and then walked away from directing a Star Trek movie with a 1930s gangster backdrop. Yeah, you mean the backdrop on Sigma Iosha? From the second season episode of Piece of the Action, maybe? Noah Hawley was well into pre-production on a Star Trek movie with a brand new cast. Until then, studio chief Emma Watts abruptly shelved it in 2020. Because it wasn't good. And 4 months after Abrams announced at Paramount's 2022 shareholder meeting that his 2009 cast would return for a movie directed by Matt Shakman, Shakman left the project to make the Fantastic Four for Marvel. It probably didn't help that none of the cast had been approached before Abrams made his announcement. How does that even happen? What kind of numbnuts does something like that? Why would the studio let him? At their shareholder meeting? That's fraud. But anyway, the studio still intends to make what it's dubbed the final chapter for the Pine Quinto Saldana cast, and Steve Yockey, the flight attendant, is writing a new draft of the script. The Star Trek film written by Seth Grahame-Smith, Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter, to be directed by Toby Haynes and or Black Mirror, the USS Callister. Directors, that's actually a good choice. The studio's insiders say it's on track to start pre-production by the end of the year. Okay, let me just break in here for a second. So what they want to do is they want to do a prequel movie that involves the Romulan War. A lot of ground pounder action. Let's just say there's a script that's what they're developing. I brought this up on the show many times. But there is somebody currently working for Paramount, the co-writer of Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning and Mission Impossible 8, who is the supervising producer of HBO's Band of Brothers, Eric Jendritson. Okay? You know who loves Star Trek? Chris McQuarrie loves Star Trek. He's already directing a Mission Impossible. He made his Jack Reacher movies with Reacher movie with Paramount. He's made five now. Five. No, he made Rogue Nation, he made Fallout, Dead Reckoning, and then this new movie that has no title. 4 movies, and 2 of them are written by Eric Jendritson. I don't even know what's going on with my signal here. I'm telling you, they don't want me to talk. So anyway, back in 2005, after the end of Star Trek Enterprise, Eric Jendritson, the supervising producer of Band of Brothers, was tapped by then Carey McCluggage and Donald DeLine, who were running Paramount at the time, to take a crack at Star Trek. Now, Eric Judrinson at the time had never seen Star Trek, didn't know much about it. Just like Nicholas Meyer before him, before he made Star Trek II. Eric Judrinson sat down and gave himself a crash course about Star Trek. And he sat down, and what did he do? He wrote what he thought was going to be a great canonical continuation of where Star Trek was at the end of Enterprise. And what was it about? The outbreak of the Romulan War, which had been alluded to but never seen. It was talked about in the first season of the original series all the way through to Enterprise. And that script, here's the title page, was called Star Trek: The Beginning by Eric Judrinson, first draft, August 22nd, 2005. I can't read anything from this script, and no, I'm not going to send you the script, but you can find it. It's out there. You can find it. It's only a first draft because Donald DeLine and Carrie McCluggage were out at Paramount, and so the script died. This script is everything. It's not perfect because there's only one draft written, but this script is everything that Star Trek needs. It introduces a brand new crew of cadets. The script opens. It's brilliant. The opening of the script it's a regatta. It's a regatta of hover catamarans that come into San Francisco Bay. And it's the graduation ceremony for Starfleet Academy. And you're meeting all of these new characters that we've never met. You know, very Top Gun-esque. Cool people, the best of the best. Graduating class. Captain Archer could be there. You could have Tom Hanks as a new admiral. The relationships between humans and Vulcans are much better than they were in Enterprise. Things have improved. So you meet all these new characters. They're testing new warp drives out by Jupiter. It sets up the scene. And what happens? The Romulans, who we don't know really. I mean, we know them, but we've never seen them. They basically show up to Earth. And they're like, listen, you either kick out, you get rid of the Vulcans. All of them. You cut ties with the Vulcans, or we destroy your planet. And humanity says, fuck you. And that begins the story. There's no ground pounders fighting a war on Earth. And let me tell you, not that that's what happens, but I'm just saying, this script that's written by a guy who already made a movie that made over $500 million for you in Mission Impossible. No other Star Trek movie has that. He's co-written Mission Impossible 8. He already wrote this. You already own it. You got to bring him back. You have him finish this script with McQuarrie and have McQuarrie direct it. That's what you do. I don't know. I'm telling you, they're trying to throttle me. They want to keep my voice. Anyway, I'm just saying, hopefully you're seeing, but yes, so that was the script. Paramount owns it, written in 2005, 19 years ago. And they only did a first draft. It never saw the light of day. But Eric Judrinson right now is working for Paramount. And I'm telling you, you have Chris McQuarrie and Judrinson rewrite this script, do new drafts on it. This is what you make. Whatever fucking script is being rewritten now or written by the guy who wrote the stewardess or whatever the fuck it was. No. Go get the supervising producer of Band of Brothers who wrote that script and Chris McQuarrie to team up. There's your goddamn Star Trek movie. And you know what? You make it for a price. You don't make it for $200,000, and you don't have to make it for $200,000 because half of it takes place in San Francisco at Starfleet Academy, and the rest of it is on sets. Doesn't have to take... Anyway. Drives me crazy. Where was I? I'm reading this article, right? I don't know why... I'm telling you, this is so weird that I'm being throttled. Far from complaining, hang on. The tension isn't exclusive to the film studio. I lost count of the number of times someone made a point to note with real pride how one or the other of the Star Trek TV productions is saving money, whether it be Section 31 repurposing sets from... This is so hilarious. Whether it be Section 31 repurposing sets from Discovery or Strange New Worlds redressing the same set to be everything from crew quarters to a sparring gym. No one will get specific about budgets, but Kurtzman says that the Section 31 costs so much less than you'd ever make a Star Trek movie for. Okay, are you high? Do you know where 90s Star Trek was made? The Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, and Voyager frequently made use of things. And then when they would make movies like Star Trek VI, go look at the President of the Federation's office and go and think to yourself, where did they shoot that movie? Oh, in the 10 Forward set. That was a staple of Star Trek when they made it at Paramount. Why? Because they had all that material. They were able to repurpose stuff all the time. That's how they kept costs down. And it took them this long to figure it out? I mean, give me a break. Anyway, we're saving money. You mean what Star Trek did all the time? Do you know that the intermix chamber of the Starship Voyager was the intermix chamber of the refit Enterprise in Star Trek the Motion Picture? It's true. Voyager debuted in 95. That intermix chamber debuted on the screen in 79. Same thing. It's not like this is new. Far from complaining, everyone seems to relish the challenge. Visual effects supervisor Jason Zimmerman says that working with Alex, the references are always at least $100 million movies, if not more, so we just kind of reverse engineer how we do that without having to spend the same amount of money and time. Why is it that you're referencing $100 million movies to make stuff? Is it not understood how Star Trek should be made on a TV budget? No. They can't make movies for a movie budget, so why should they make TV shows on a TV budget? You don't need lots of money and special effects when you have a great story. Star Trek proved that time and time again. 2 words, bottle show. The Doomsday Machine. How about that? 2 starships for the price of 1. Why make 1 when you can have 2 at twice the price? That's what Star Trek Discovery is. In one of Kurtzman's several production offices in Toronto, he and production designer Matthew Davies are scrutinizing a series of concept drawings for the newest Star Trek show, Starfleet Academy. A bit earlier, they showed me their plans for the series' Central Academic Atrium, a sprawling 2-story structure that will include a mess hall, an amphitheater, trees, catwalks, multiple classrooms, and a striking view of the Golden Gate Bridge in a single continuous space. To fit it all in, they plan to use every inch of Pinewood, Toronto's 45,900 square foot soundstage, the largest in Canada. But this is a Star Trek show, so there does need to be starships, and Kurtzman is discussing with Davies about how one of them should look. The issue is that Starfleet Academy is set in the 32nd century, an era so far into the future, Kurtzman and his team need to invent much of its design language. It's going to be interesting to watch a show that is set in the 32nd century, and yet human beings would bear little resemblance to how they... I do not know what's going on. Anyway, I'm sorry about that. For me, this design is almost too Klingon, Kurtzman says. I want to see the outline and instinctively on a blink recognize it as a Federation ship. A Federation ship that's 900 years in the future? That would be like saying that you wanted to recognize a ship from 900 years in our past. How does that even work? Why would that even work? That makes no sense. It makes no sense at all. Having a Starfleet Academy show set in the 32nd century... they're not smart enough to make that show. Just saying. If expansive and elaborate narrative framework of alien species, theoretical technology, and a parahistorical incident. As the word implies for some fans, canon is no less than holy writ. Any perceived deviation or disruption, like deciding Burnham is Spock's herefore unmentioned adoptive sister, is akin to blasphemy, and Trek fans have never been shy about expressing their displeasure. And that's where you get to this quote. We listen to a lot of it, Kurtzman says. I think I'm able to separate the toxic fandom from the really true fans who love Star Trek and want you to hear what they have to say about what they would like to see. By season 2, Discovery writers pivoted from its dour, war-torn first season and sent the show on its trajectory 900 years into the future. We had to be... I don't even know. I don't know what's going on. I'm just going to assume that I am. Oh, well. That freedom affords Starfleet Academy a far more creative latitude while also dramatically reducing how much the show's target audience of tweens and teens need to know about Star Trek before watching, which puts them on the same footing as the students depicted in the show. First of all, you're expecting to make a show that is set 900 years in the future for the teens and tweens of today? Think about that. Let's just extrapolate on, let's say that let's put the shoe on the other foot. If you were a teen that was alive in the 11th century and somebody was making a show that was set in the 20th century, would you have any idea what you were watching? The idea of doing a Starfleet Academy show in the 32nd century and making it plausible at all is absurd. The premise doesn't work. I mean, all you're going to wind up doing, because you're going to be forced into this, is telling stories that appeal to people in the 21st century. Well, how can you do that 900 years in the future and make it credible? I mean, honestly, this is an honest, I'm asking an honest question. I mean, how do you do that? I mean, I guess you go back and you make like I, Claudius or something. You make a show like Gladiator, but it's easy to go back because we've already been there. We know what Aristotle, we know poetics, we know things that were taught. But 900 years from now, they can't even tell us a credible science fiction story about the future. How are they supposed to tell us a story about human beings going to school 1,000 years hence, 900 years hence? How do you do that? I don't know how to do that. I mean, I think that the future depicted in Star Trek Discovery is one of the most unimaginative futures I've ever seen depicted in any form. I mean, look at Dune. Dune went backwards to a feudal society. How are you going to make a credible show about going to school 900 years from now? How? You know how you're going to do it? By making it seem like they're going to school fucking today with a bunch of super science. The thing is, a future 900 years from now would look so different from our world today, just extrapolating on the technology alone. But then they're going to say, well, you know, the burn really brought everything back, so it's really only like 300 or 400 years in the future. Still doesn't work. You're asking a bunch of people who can barely tell a credible science fiction story to set an entire series in a future 900 years from now? And it's not going to work. That idea is a bad idea. I don't even know. Listen to this. Oh, here we go. This is how this article ends. This is the best. The freedom affords Starfleet Academy far more creative latitude while also dramatically reducing how much the show's target audience of tweens and teens needs to know about Star Trek before watching, which puts them on the same footing as the students depicted in the show. These are kids who've never had a red alert before. Really? Noga Landau, executive producer and co-showrunner, says they never had to operate a transporter or be in a phaser fight. Why not? In the Starfleet Academy writer's room in Secret Hideout's Santa Monica offices, Kurtzman tells the staff, a mix of Star Trek diehards, part-time fans, and total newbies, that he wants to take a 30,000-foot view for a moment. I think we need to ground in science more throughout the show, he says, a giant framed photograph of Spock ears just over his shoulder. The kids need to use science more to solve problems. Immediately, one of the writers brightens. Are you saying we can amp up the technobabble, she says? I'm just excited I get to use my computer science degree. After that, they break for lunch, and Kurtzman is asked how much longer he plans to keep making Star Trek. The minute I fall out of love with it is the minute that it's not for me anymore. I'm not there yet, he says. To be able to build in this universe, to tell stories that are fundamentally about optimism and a better future at a time when the world seems to be falling apart, it's a really powerful place to live every day. Are you saying we can amp up the technobabble? I'm just excited I get to use my computer science degree. Alex Kurtzman, I think we need to ground in science more throughout the show, he says. The kids need to use science more to solve problems. That's a direct quote. The kids need to use science more to solve problems. What kind of clown world do we live in, man? I mean, honestly, they need to use science more. Yeah, you think you're going to Starfleet Academy, right? I mean, use science. These are supposed to be the best minds in. This is what we're getting. This is what we're getting. Does that mean we can use more technobabble? I can use my computer science degree. No, you fucking can't. In the 32nd century, your science degree doesn't mean shit. You can't even conceive of what a computer would look like 900 years from now. Give me a fucking break. Who are these idiots? I'm sorry. It doesn't, I mean, are you kidding me? I'm going to use my computer science degree. You're not going to be able to recognize a computer in 20 years, much less 900. God. You read this stuff and you're like, for fuck's sake. For fuck's sake. Really? Anyway. I'm telling you. Anyway, you know what? Let's see what you guys are saying. I don't even know if you can still read me. Don't know. Fat Steven says, Basic Instinct 3, The Search for Spock's Underwear. Tack sends in a tip and says, I may have been too young to grow up with Siskel and Ebert, but I was born at just the right time to have John Campea and Robert Meyer Burnett. And not trying to sound like a fangirl, I think my generation is just as lucky with that combination. Well, Tack, that's very nice of you to say. I very much appreciate that. That's most kind. Most kind. Why I keep seeing this thing turn red. I'll just keep powering through. Scott Bartholomew says, couple an obvious showrunner who doesn't know shit about Trek with DEI, ESG, AEIOU, and you have a recipe for disaster. I mean, can you imagine a show that's supposed to be set in the 32nd century addressing adolescent tweens and teens problems of today? I mean, can you imagine that? Maybe now it's where my imagination is falls short. But how are teens and tweens going to at all be able to relate what teens and tweens are going through in 900 years? How are they going to do that? Especially because how do you conceive of what that world... It's not like they're going to be able to truly extrapolate what that world would look like. They're not going to do that, which is amazing. Unbelievable. Michael Nemo says, did you hear that Rachel Garrett is in Section 31? Yes, I did. And we read it all together. Joe Panora says, the article confirms Terry Trek ain't happening. Oh, I could confirm Terry Trek ain't happening. Fat Steven says, wait, why didn't they use shuttlecrafts or use phasers to evaporate the snow or precision torpedo and make a trench to have the snow go into it? You'll just have to watch the episode. Stephen Langford says, in Superman 2, Lois Lane punches Ursa off a cliff. I can't be the only one who saw this and thought Lois Lane killed someone and got away with it. Soups watched her do it and didn't say anything. He just smiled. Laugh out loud. Your thoughts, Rob. Thanks. Well, I would assume that no matter what you did, that Kryptonian physiology would have allowed them to survive the fall. It's funny. I never thought that the Kryptonians were like killed at the end of Superman 2. Anyway. Captain Robert April says, I just heard about what they've got planned for the Section 31 movie. I'm not having happy thoughts. And then he goes on to say, Tarantino Trek now. Yeah, I don't have happy thoughts either. Ria Lavi says, I love you. I know. Thank you for that. I appreciate it. Gio Diaz says, my wife is watching with me and she says, you're so upset. She's worried you're going to punch your cat. You need an old fashioned, my friend. I've only got water. I have no. I'm. You know what? I'm upset because Star Trek as a platform has been so inspirational to me my whole life, on a personal level and a social level and a professional level. I was a documentarian. I mean, if you go and if you buy the new Star Trek, the Picard Legacy box set, I spent 3 years of my life interviewing most of the people responsible for Star Trek The Next Generation and making hours and hours and hours and hours and hours of documentaries about them. So on a professional level, I gained a lot of insight into how to make good Star Trek. I've also, I made a movie with William Shatner. And, so I was a paid Star Trek consultant for Paramount in the mid-90s. I was paid to tell licensees what made good or bad Star Trek. I was. By the studio. So I look at this kind of stuff. I've loved Star Trek my whole life. And it's frustrating to watch a show that has caused a lot of people to become doctors and gone into engineering and going on to make spacecraft for real, to have to be given something that is substandard. It's just maddening. Michael Nemo says, hot take, good but dead Philippa and Mirror Burnham are way more interesting than Empress Philippa and regular Burnham. I would tend to agree. Rail Lavi says, how is this clusterfuck allowed to continue? I don't know, because they've got contracts. Scott Bartholomew says, Rob, your cogent analysis tonight of the decline of the Trek franchise has been, well, orgasmic. Hey, look, if there's one thing I'd like to bring to people and be known for, it's orgasms. So, Mr. Tickle Trunk says, thanks for putting a smile on my insomnia tonight. Well, you are welcome. I come to serve, as Spock would say. Of course, they probably don't know that. Let's see. Let's see what other people say. Chuck Tate says he's become an imagination connoisseur. Thank you, Chuck. Donald Gooch became an imagination connoisseur. Thank you for that, too. Appreciate it. Jose Taco says, Nerdrotic made the call today to get to you 100K. Did he really? Well, that was very nice. I love Gary. And he really said that? Thank you, Gary. Also, happy birthday. Thank you. Kinky Sphincter has been a member for 39 months. And Stephen Langford, I didn't even realize he sent it. That tip was for $50. Stephen, well, let me opine on that. I didn't realize that because I was looking at a different thing. Honestly, in Superman 2, I never did feel that Ursa, that even when they lost their powers, I didn't feel anyone was going to die. And, you could use a tuck here and there yourself, sister. I mean, I honestly believe that their Kryptonian physiology allowed them to survive. And by the way, that was very generous. Thank you for that. I appreciate that. That's very nice. So we shall see. Let's see. I think I've caught up with what everybody was saying. Tom Jr. Jackson says, Rob, what do you think of the picture I did of you? Also, people are having a hard time sending letters. And yeah, we're playing with the website. So we will be back. We'll be back with that soon. Captain Robert April has been a member for 20 months. Now, I do have a letter that I would like to read. And this letter is the third letter, the Return of the Jedi, or the Return of the King, if you will, from our friend Undead Sick in Holland. And let's see. Let me find Undead Sick. And okay, letters. They were the ones that made me talk about believability. So here's the final letter. I would say. This is again from our friend Undead Sick in Holland. Hello, Rob. Once again, am I? I'm not receiving enough. Let's see. God damn, this is so frustrating to see. I'm hoping that you guys can see me. I'm just going to assume that you guys can. It keeps fluctuating. Hello, Rob. Once again, thank you for reading my letter on the show, and you have helped me understand better what you were talking about, and I appreciate that. However, there are still some things I can't wrap my head around and take issue with, which I will try and elaborate on. First of all, when you talk about Lord of the Rings and the Rings of Power, you're absolutely right. The demographics were what they were in Middle-earth, and it's true that Tolkien was making a myth for England at a specific time. However, I would argue that the moment you introduce orcs and giant spiders, as well as having a world with magic, you're disconnecting yourself from an actual world that exists. Okay. Here's the thing. I totally disagree with that. Because when you introduce a giant spider, you could say to yourself, okay, the physics, the larger a spider gets, the heavier it is. So could Shelob move around in the way that... Now, we're not going to think about this right off the bat. But if you wanted to talk about the reality of it, however, Shelob still has to act like a spider would act. It's a big spider, which makes it immediately more dangerous. But if Shelob had wings and flew, suddenly you're going to be like, I don't believe that anymore. You know, you can make things bigger. You can push the edge of believability. But you still have to make the spider have the qualities of a spider because Shelob's a spider. You still have to make, if the rules, you still have to have, even though it's a giant spider, rules still have to govern the behavior and the actions of that spider. It has to work somehow where you can believe that the spider exists, because if the spider can do anything, then it loses its ability to engage an audience. Like, I don't buy it anymore. And then they tune out. Here was, I'll give you an example of something that people probably don't get mad at, but there was a lot of, we saw our first black dwarf in Rings of Power. Now, here's the thing. As somebody pointed out, dwarves spend a lot of their time underground. So the whole thing about the dwarven, and they have, the dwarves have, obviously they have a certain, they have certain characteristics because they're dwarves. So how would you have black dwarves? I mean, I guess you could say that they immigrated from somewhere, but the features that human beings have, different features, really come down to where people are from. You know, like humanity began in Africa, Olduvai Gorge, Dr. Leakey, and all of that. And the reason that human beings developed because we were black, it was an environmental thing. You know, if people first came up about Norway or something, it would be different. And so the way people and where people ended up living on our planet reflects on the different ethnicities on Earth. There's one race of human beings, the human race. But the difference in ethnicities has to do with where most of your people, or whatever your ethnic background is, where you came from on the planet. So that's why you know what Star Trek taught me? That racism is kind of stupid, because however you look or wherever you are from, it's a function of the natural evolution of where your ancestors spent most of their time on this planet. So all the different races, all the different ethnicities on Earth are just representative of where we're from as humanity was spreading out across the globe, which is actually kind of cool. I mean, I would think that that's kind of a neat thing, rather than being something that we all hate. It's so superficial why we hate each other. And look, when you're trying to create credibility, to me, when you shoehorn somebody in, you're posing a question like, okay, if they're a race of dwarves and you want people to believe in them, to just shoehorn various ethnicities into, and you can say, what does it matter? Because, you know, these people you can have them to be any way you want. But then you have to explain. I mean, Tolkien spent a long time thinking about all of this. And so in his mind, he's like, okay, he's dealing with the different ethnicities of the planet, but Middle-earth is essentially England. You know, it's the British Isles. And so you kind of have to go with that. And when you try and subvert it for more modern audiences or whatever, and I get the idea is sound, but it again, it undercuts the credibility of the fictional universe he created. And that's the only thing that I would So let me get back to your letter. However, I would argue that the moment you introduce orcs and giant spiders as well in having a world with magic, you're disconnecting yourself from the actual world that exists. So in reality, if we're honest, at that point, there is no reality or suspension of disbelief to break. I completely 100% disagree with that. Because you still, even, as a matter of fact, I would say it's even more important that when you're creating fantasy worlds and you're giving them all of this unreal stuff, in order to keep an audience still engaged, they have to believe. You can't just, magic is governed by rules, and those rules of magic are what actually interest us in the first place. For instance, hey, once you have warp drive and you can travel wherever you want to go in the universe, if you could just go anywhere in the universe you wanted and be as fast as you want, well, then it means nothing. It doesn't matter. Warp drive doesn't. But when you make warp drive work, warp factor 1, warp factor 2, warp factor 3, suddenly warp has a thing, like it's got a whole way of working. You can't go warp 10 very, very, very long. In the original series, you couldn't go warp 10 at all. You can go warp 9. And it was the speed of light cubed was generally considered what warp drive was. So warp 1 is 1 times 1 times 1, the speed of light. Warp 2 is 2 times 2 times 2, 3 times 3 times 3, and onward. I think 512, what is it, 9 times 9 times 9 or something? That was how fast you could travel beyond the speed of light or whatever. But then you're warping space anyway. It's fantasy realms that require rules to be believable more so than the real world. So when you disassociate yourself from it, it's like the same thing is true if you watch a car racing movie. And suddenly automobiles, and this is my problem with Fast 9 and Fast 10, physics leave cars behind. Well, then there's no peril. If a car suddenly behaves in a way that we know a car how it wouldn't behave, then there's no peril created. The whole point about car chases is that we've all been in cars, so we know what they can and can't do. And that's what makes a car chase exciting, because we know how. And that's why car chasing or action scenes are great. And look, an action scene, as soon as an action scene violates the laws of physics, I mean, unless violating the laws of physics, like in a wuxia movie or Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, well, then it becomes interesting. You know, and if you don't do that, it doesn't work unless you have to establish that, and then people don't care. The same goes for Westeros. The moment you decide to have things like White Walkers and dragons in that show, you're making a point. You have to make your dragons credible. Dragons have to have weight. They can only fly so fast. They get tired. The thing is, your fantasy has to have a quality of reality in order for it to work. Otherwise, an audience, it just becomes a blur and you become completely disengaged. Everything, and as I've said, your fantasy, your fiction has to have truth in it. Otherwise, it doesn't work. You won't have anything escapist, because if everything can happen, then there's no reason it won't engage you. The more you make fantasy real, the more engaging it becomes. The same goes for Westeros. I can't understand why that is regarded as a bad thing. Also, going to your reaction to the raft in Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. Come on, Rob. Weren't you trying to shape the answer to fit the question? No, I'm not. I'm saying the same with RoboCop exists. You can have as many thematics and metaphors as you want, but at the end of the day, it's still about a freaking cyborg fighting crime. Yeah, it is. It's about a cyborg fight. I mean, that's the whole point, is that there are rules that govern the fantasy. And I think what you're mistaking is you're not realizing that the people like RoboCop because they believe in it. The way RoboCop is presented as being developed, Officer Murphy getting crucified, a human being being put into that, encased in that suit, the cybernetic suit and all that, we believe. The movie made us believe that RoboCop is real. But if RoboCop could suddenly run 100 miles an hour, his credibility would go out the window and you'd get bored. It wouldn't work. And I'm going back to Star Trek. I get what you were saying, but I'll try and tell you my feelings about it again. When a show when as a show you start making statements that you were talking about, you are creating a precedent within your audience by telling them the only way your life is going to be worth something is if you reach for the clouds. Again, you are basically telling them that they have to be nothing but perfection, because otherwise, do you even have meaning when you are nothing but excellence? Well, now, hang on a second. There's plenty of stories about people that, I don't even know if I'm still broadcasting, to be honest. God, it's so annoying. I'm just seeing a red light. It's showing that you're not getting anything. But anyway, I'll just keep going. The thing about Star Trek is, the people at Starfleet Academy, you are watching a show about the top 1% of people. Not everybody gets to go to Starfleet Academy, just like not everybody gets to go to Harvard. You have to work at a certain level. I find it inspirational to watch a group of people like on the Starship Enterprise that are better than me. I can aspire in my own life, such as it is, to try and be excellent at what I do, but I'm never going to be those people. And I don't. And the thing is, to be a part of Starfleet Command, to be on the bridge of a starship, even within starships, if you go to the episode Bread and Circuses, Maricus, the first citizen, he'll tell you he flunked out a Starfleet, or he left Starfleet, and he even says to the pro-council that Starfleet commanders like Kirk are the best of the best, and he himself wasn't as good, and he can recognize it and say these guys are the top of the class. I have no problem with recognizing excellence. It doesn't bother me that I'll never be as excellent as they are. There's lots of people I know in my life that are way better than I am at things. And I like the fact that they're better than me. I can aspire and look at them, and they're inspirational. And Star Trek, look, my problem is I don't watch Star Trek to watch people like myself. I don't watch a lot of things to watch. I know who I am. I'd rather watch stories about people. Like, for instance, look, one of my favorite movies is Paul Newman in The Verdict. At the beginning of The Verdict, Paul Newman's a washed-up drunk. He can barely take care of himself. He plays pinball and drinks whiskey at a bar by himself. He's a lost cause. But then he has a chance for a redemption because he's actually a great lawyer. And he has this great case. Well, he has a case that's probably unwinnable. But watching him win that case, spoiler alert, his redemptive arc is what makes that movie so inspiring to me. I love watching a washed-up old drunk triumph over odds. And it's not that I don't say that people's lives aren't worth anything. Most people lead lives of quiet desperation. I happen to like watching stories about people that are really good at their jobs. And when those people find things that they have to overcome, that's interesting to me. I don't take it personally. And then what you say is the only way your life is going to be worth something is if you reach for the clouds. Again, you are basically telling them that they have to be nothing but perfection, because otherwise, do you even have meaning when you're nothing but excellence? And maybe people felt that way in the 60s, but that's the problem I am having. It's as simple as that to me. The reason I hated Madam Web is not because it's such a reflection of truth or a believable portrayal of a universe that doesn't even exist. I hated it because that's the end of my rant. Once again, greetings from Holland. Look, I hear you. I'm just saying that Madam Web did not have a great story and great characters. So, but I appreciate what you're saying. I hope I've made myself a little bit more clear. Calvin Welborn says, you are paranoid. You are repeating yourself. Look, all I'm seeing is that I don't know what's going on, but right now, I have an indicator that shows when I have a good, strong signal, and it says excellent, and it doesn't. And I'm looking at a yellow thing, so it looks bad to me. Dan Candy says, would you rather serve under Esteban, Terrell, or Styles? Well, at least Esteban he got to where he was going. Both of all three of them. Probably Captain Terrell, because, he was probably a pretty good captain until Khan, he ran Styles was a douche and Esteban was a douche, but Terrell wasn't. I'd serve under Terrell. He was, by the way, the captain of the Reliant in Star Trek 2. Vortiz says, I bought the 4K Steelbook of Edge of Tomorrow. Blown away, first time watching. You'd never seen it before. And in 4K, that movie's great. That movie's great. So I'm glad that you got that. Anyway, I think I'm going to end this show now. I'd love to keep ranting and raving. I'm going to end this show now. I don't know how well it went. I apologize to everybody profusely. So, yeah, that's all I can say. I want to thank you all for being here. I want to thank everybody for supporting the channel via super chats and tips and memberships and all of those things. Thank you so very much. I want to thank Tom Jr. Jackson for being a great moderator. And hopefully you could see my rant. I don't know what the problem was. But at any rate, yeah. And I would say this. Remember, every person you meet has a story to tell that you have yet to hear. And all you have to do is listen. And with that, I say to everyone, live long and prosper. I shall do neither. I have killed my captain. Oh, well, I didn't really, but I want you to. This doesn't work. There's enough signal for all three of you.